From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's what's ahead. One of the featured speakers at K-State's 2022 Cattlemen's Day last Friday from the National Weather Center at the University of Oklahoma, Jeff Basara, will talk about historic climate cycles in the Great Plains, and he shares the center's drought outlook for the region for the rest of 2022. Then the next in this week's features on the 6 Kansas farm couples who will be formally inducted this week as Kansas Master Farmers, Master Farm Homemakers. Today, the story of Wayne and Carrie Grimm of Brown County. And on this week's edition of Milk Lines, K-State's Mike Brouk talks about responding to expected higher milk prices by ramping up one's dairy milk flow. All that here on Agriculture Today. We're back now on this Agriculture Today and with a featured presenter from the 2022 Cattlemen's Day at Kansas State University. The subject that he tackled, the weather. We're joined now by University of Oklahoma meteorologist Jeff Basara. Jeff, tell us a little more about what would be considered the epicenter of weather information and research that you come from at that university, tied in very much with NOAA and other things.
Yeah, so it's great to be here. I'm with the School of Meteorology at the University of Oklahoma. I'm an associate professor. And the National Weather Center is a building on the campus of the University of Oklahoma, but it represents a partnership between the academic activities of the School of Meteorology, plus federal partners like the National Severe Storms Laboratory, the Storm Prediction Center, the National Weather Service Forecast Office, and then state agencies like the Oklahoma Climatological Survey. So it's a grouping of federal, state, and university organizations that work together to try to understand weather and climate across the region, like the Great Plains, and of course around the world.
If you're a weather junkie, it's a mecca, isn't it?
Absolutely, and there's a reason why I have been there for 27 years.
What is your role then specifically, although, like you say, you've been there well over 2 decades in various capacities?
Yeah, so my role is, first of all, as a professor, as an instructor, as a mentor. So I teach courses with students in the School of Meteorology, but I also have research projects that span the Great Plains as well as global. So we have projects that we work on with the USDA, with NOAA, with NASA to try to understand what's happening to our weather and climate, and specifically to the Great Plains. What's happening in the past, what we can discern about that for our current state of weather and climate in the Great Plains. And, of course, as we look forward, what does that mean for our future? What does that mean for water resources? What does that mean for agriculture? Because weather and climate play such a critical role in our local economy, our water resources, and really the needs of our communities across the region, which includes Kansas and Oklahoma.
That started to get at the core of your presentation at Cattlemen's Day. What's on everybody's minds currently, the weather extremes that we see in the Great Plains region. This past winter, now entering early spring, is, again, more evidence of that.
Yeah, so the Great Plains, the only thing you can really count on about the Great Plains and weather and climate is that we will not be at normal. So normal often doesn't really mean a whole lot to us. We're often transitioning from one side of the spectrum to the other. And if it's precipitation right now, unfortunately, we're in a period of below normal precipitation. And we are in a pattern that is going to persist in that area. And that's unfortunate. You know, just a couple of years ago, 2019, we had more precipitation than we probably needed. And that's part of the great challenges of the Great Plains in terms of how do we understand what's happening with our water resources. The variability that always exists, is this continuing, or is this a new type of variability that's showing up? And when we look at something like today, with drought that has entrenched much of the Great Plains, is this going to persist? Will we see a transition out of drought at some point soon, which obviously is at the forefront of many people's minds?
I'm going to ask you for hopefully an answer to that in just a moment here, but where does this current state of weather, and dry weather in particular, stand historically? How does it compare?
Well, I mean, we have seen this before. And if you really kind of look at it, we have seen this before as recently as 2018. That was a very dry winter, especially in the southern Great Plains, but Kansas, especially western Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, through the months of October and through March, had very, very minimal precipitation. And that caused a number of real negative consequences. So we see this. This is not something that we haven't seen before. We do see this happen with these wintertime precipitation patterns that persist and are very dry. So from a historical standpoint, this is kind of, we end up in some of these cycles. This is probably something that we see about once every 5 years, which would be about on time in that regard. At the same time, we don't need these types of conditions because once we do have them, they set us up for other types of impacts, like, unfortunately, that last drought ended with a series of significant wildfires across the western parts of the states.
Awfully tough situations, but is it beyond just drought in respect to what we've seen in the past? Is this extreme weather behavior unprecedented or not?
No, I wouldn't say it's unprecedented, but I think one of the challenges that we've seen is when we think of historically about drought in the Great Plains, we're always captured by the drought of the 1930s, the Dust Bowl, right? And then there's also the understanding that it reappeared in the 1950s, and those were droughts that were decadal in length. And what we see now are these really intense droughts that often are 1 to 2 years in length, but can be really intense. And because of that, we've also had in recent years abundant precipitation. And so we've kind of developed a different type of pattern, and really the climatology bears that out, that we've transitioned from some of these more decadal type features to a more high-frequency oscillation between drought and the other aspect, of which we call pluvials, or above normal precipitation. What most people don't remember is that between the droughts of the 1930s and 1950s, 1940s were exceptionally wet in this region. We've seen these oscillations back and forth. But when we've done the research, and there's been a number of studies in the last decade that have really kind of pointed to this in the Great Plains, the hydrologic cycle in the Great Plains is accelerating, meaning these features that used to be more decadal in length are becoming more high frequency. So we rapidly transition from one of these events back to the other extreme, which in some ways really does point out that maybe we'll see some additional precipitation here soon.
And before we talk of that, does this hold also on the temperature side? Yeah,
so, one thing is the temperatures in the region, for the most part, especially during the warm season, have kind of held towards climatology. The 1930s and the 1950s especially were extremely warm and dry. What we've seen more recently is it's just warm in general, and especially the winters. And we've had a very mild winter, and we've had some of these bouts of colder air, but at the same time, December was exceptionally warm. We've had some of these exceptionally warm periods intermixed, and our winter temperatures are actually increasing over the long term. And so that presents another aspect of this sort of changing climate system that is happening here in the Great Plains, where we see much higher frequency in precipitation extremes, and at the same time just a general warming, not so much in the warm season, but certainly in the cold season.
Well, then, to this question that you've been touching upon, but we haven't gotten to it yet, will we see the dry weather give way? We point frequently to La Nina as the main catalyst, and we're getting to the point now, spring planting, grass season as well, coming up quite soon. A highly critical question for producers.
Yeah, so this is where the news isn't the greatest news in the short term. This has been a very strongly forced La Nina year. I mean, this is about as classic of an environment as we can see from a La Nina standpoint, with very dry in the Great Plains, and the Ohio River Valley, Tennessee River Valleys are actually pretty wet, and that's pretty much the classic La Nina signal. And right now we're still in La Nina. Now, the good news that I can sort of pass along is that as we look towards the future and we look towards the forecast, there's evidence that La Nina will weaken as we go into the summer months. My concern is that in the short term, we are going to stay dry. And because of that, that's going to, with plenty of available grassland and forage out there, that sets up circumstances that are ripe for wildfires. And my other concern is that though the La Nina forcing could end as we get towards the summer, if we don't get some sort of buffer from a precipitation standpoint, we know that in the summer, the local conditions, the local land atmosphere impacts instead of the ocean atmosphere impacts, those land atmosphere impacts here in the Great Plains can perpetuate something that's already in place. And so if it's already hot and dry, the local conditions may then lead to a continuation of that through the summer months. None of that is great news if you're looking for precipitation. And I'm hopeful that maybe as La Nina weakens, we'll get a window there of maybe some different type of storm track that will allow for some precipitation in the region to kind of mitigate those land-atmosphere interactions as we move into the summer months.
Is that to say we may see an El Nino at some time, even in 2022?
Well, I think the jury's out on that. But what it's between El Nino and La Nina is what we call neutral. So we're trending towards neutral. What that means is that the local conditions actually can play a more important role, and that's why I'm concerned about the local environment sort of feeding back into perpetuating our dry conditions as we go into the summer months. But I'm also hopeful April, May, and June are our wettest months, and we haven't reached that point yet. And there's still time and opportunity to make up. We've seen it before, 2007 in the Great Plains, 2015 in the Great Plains, where we had exceptional amounts of precipitation during May, which then sort of mitigated drought that had been pre-existing. So it can happen.
Last thing here, such remarkable resources at the National Weather Center based at the University of Oklahoma. How might folks tap into some of that good information that routinely is cranked out there?
Well, there's plenty of online resources that are there. Weather.gov is a great place to go. And, of course, when we think about severe weather season coming up, being cognizant of that, there are great resources that are available through the Storm Prediction Center and their website, and that season is coming. And we don't want to be caught unawares of those types of conditions as well, because just like any of these other features, they can be devastating when they do occur.
And, Jeff, it's been a pleasure having you at Cattlemen's Day and for this conversation likewise. Thank you for your time and your comments.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, and thankful that we can all share in these types of events and activities because, quite honestly, the weather and climate affects us all.
You bet it does. Jeff Basara from the School of Meteorology at the University of Oklahoma and the National Weather Center, based at that institution as well. He was invited to talk weather extremes at Cattlemen's Day 2022 at K-State this past Friday. We'll be back with more for you on Agriculture Today. Next up on Agriculture Today, the story of another of the standout Kansas farm couples who will be formally honored later this week as the 2021 class of Kansas Master Farmers, Master Farm Homemakers. Again, this a long-time recognition program, co-sponsored by K-State Research and Extension and Kansas Farmer Magazine. It was evident fairly early on that Wayne and Carrie Grimm were destined for farming success. They knew each other growing up from either side of Sabetha in northeast Kansas. They attended high school together and both were prominent in the FFA, Wayne earning the American Farmer degree and Carrie eventually serving as a state FFA officer. After high school, Wayne immediately entered the family dairy and hog farming operation in far western Brown County. Carrie, who was raised on her family's beef cattle operation, went on to Kansas State University, earning her degree in animal science. Over time, Wayne and Carrie converted their livestock enterprise fully over to beef cattle production. Wayne and Carrie now manage a 650-cow herd, finishing their own calves and feeding around 800 head in their own lot. They're up to 1,100 crop acres and 2,000 acres of pasture. What really distinguishes the Grimms is their willingness to tell agriculture's story by welcoming the public to Double G&L Farms. They annually stage multiple events for children on the farm, including a farm safety day that this past year drew 500 students from the area. They also give general farm tours to around 250 people a year. Their goal is to inform present and future consumers what it takes to get food on their table. Wayne talks about how it all started for him.
Knew I wanted to farm from the beginning, so as soon as I could drive a tractor or skid loader or whatever, it was all farming for me.
I knew him in high school, and he couldn't get out of high school fast enough. He just wanted to farm.
Yep.
Back then, he got out of school a lot, too. They don't do that anymore, I don't know.
Carrie, you grew up on a farm likewise, correct? In this very area?
Yes. My parents both had town jobs, but Dad had cattle on the side.
Before we go any further, both of you were well ingrained in the FFA program at Sabetha High School and were quite accomplished in your own rights. Talk about that experience and what you think you gained from that.
Well, we had a good judging team. There was a core group, my wife and I, and actually I was just kind of the alternate. We had an ag teacher that really pushed judging, and we went lots of places, Fort Scott, Miami, Oklahoma, every year. Somehow we did good enough that we qualified to go to Denver one year.
Well, I went twice.
So,
she's going to lord that over you.
Yeah. Alternate didn't get to go one year.
Carrie, you were a state officer eventually then, right?
Mm-hmm. After I graduated from high school, then I ran for state FFA office and was selected as treasurer.
Obviously, things such as the judging and the practical aspects were important to you, but the leadership development, what did that do for you, that FFA experience, in that respect?
Well, it gave you a sense of responsibility and record keeping and stuff like that.
I feel like the leadership has helped in what we do today as far as agriculture advocates. I think that's something that is very important to us and we hold dear.
And we'll come back to the advocacy. Definitely want to do that in just a second. Let's talk about how the farm has evolved over the years. When you returned, Wayne, for good, right away, how has it changed? You've shifted emphasis from the dairy, right?
Yeah. When my brother got out of high school, who's 2 years younger than me, our dairy, my grandpa had started. And it was 50 years old, and you either upgrade to something new because it's getting wore out, or you get out completely. And so we sent him to Minnesota to work on a big dairy, a couple thousand head dairy. And he was up there, I think, 6 months. And then he came home and he said, "Nah, that's not what we want to do long term," because we were going to have to spend a couple $1 million back then to build a big dairy and start all over again. And so we decided not to do that. So we got out of the dairy business. At that point, it was about time this place came available. Then that gave us the opportunity to start in the beef cattle. So my brother and I farmed together till 2019, and then we split that corporation up. Our dad retired 5 years before that, something like that, and he had moved to Sabetha, and our children were getting old enough to work on our end, and his children were getting old enough. And we just feel it's important to split up the farm for the next generation. And our dad and his brothers did the same thing in 91. So I was a sophomore in high school and they split up. They all farmed together. That's how we approach farming. We like to keep it more family than to get to be a huge conglomerate.
So now you are at 1,100 acres of crop ground and about 2,000 acres of pasture and grass, 650 cows, and you're feeding some cattle out. In fact, this is pretty much a calving to finish operation.
Yeah. Yep. Keep all our own calves and finish them all out, plus I buy a few. I got some local guys that use my bulls that I buy their calves back, and also will finish out with a sale barn. Just buy a few, just finish my pens out so my pens are full.
As far as the secret to succeeding with the cattle operation, is it about genetics? Is it about good marketing? What do you two focus on?
Well, genetics does go a long ways. We used to feed for a company called Lohr's Lean, and they wanted a lean and select carcass, completely the opposite of the industry. And so we fed for them for 10 years, and I had my cow herd geared toward that. And they quit probably about 6 or 7 years ago. They quit and went to grass-fed beef, which cut me out. So we had to retool everything and start over again because we needed to get a choice carcass, not a select. And so we had a limousine herd geared toward Lohr's Lean, and so we kept the cow herd. I just sold all my bulls and started over with bulls strictly going for the marbling to try to get our marbling back in. And so in 6 years, we've made huge strides to now this past year, we were 20% primes. So we're getting good enough that the packers really want our cattle.
I do want to spend time here, though, talking about something that both of you are rather dedicated toward and committed to, and that is agricultural advocacy. Carrie, we'll start with you because this has been a passion of yours for sure for some time.
Well, I just feel that it's important that the consumer knows where their food comes from. I think it starts with the children. In college, I was into Cattlewomen, and I was the Kansas Cattlewomen president. So I guess that was kind of ingrained in me to promote our product. After Elsie, our oldest, was born, she was about 3, we decided to try this Farm Safety Day, and the Cattlewomen helped with that. And we do a Farm Safety Day for first and second graders in the area. We started with about 150 students. Now we teach about 500 students. And since it's first and second grade, we do every other year. But we'd like to reach out to even more schools, more children in the future. We open our farm up in the spring for tours. They're free of charge. And we have preschoolers come and first graders have come for field trips. And we have about 80 to 100 students come every spring besides the Farm Safety Day, just to see what we do. They have hands-on experiences. They feed the animals. They see where the milk comes from, where their wool comes from. They get to milk a goat, see where the eggs and meat comes from. In 2020, of course, we weren't able to open our farm up due to the pandemic. We started a YouTube channel to try to reach out to the students in that way. We now have 2,300 subscribers, so we know of at least one teacher in Wichita who has used our channel as an educational tool for his classroom. So we're excited about that. Yeah.
But beyond just the kids, you've had international visitors to this operation too.
Yeah, we've had people from town that have international people come and they bring them out to show them. I don't remember how many countries we've had, but it's been
Belgium and Spain and Hungary and Mexico.
You're going to keep doing this outreach thing for a while, it sounds. You're pretty much
word's getting
committed.
out, so it's the word's getting out, so they call us pretty freely to want to know if they can come out.
It's part of, yes, we're educating those in the cities and those that don't have the exposure to farm life.
Wayne and Carrie Grimm of Brown County. On tomorrow's broadcast, you'll hear about 2 more couples who are part of the 2021 Kansas Master Farmer, Master Farm Homemaker class, they being Larry and Virginia Kepley of Grant County and Nathan and Susie Larson of Riley County. This is Agriculture Today. Agriculture Today continues now as we're around to time once more for another edition of Milk Lines, featuring K-State Research and Extension dairy specialist Mike Brouk. And Mike telling us today that the milk market is telling you dairy producers to optimize your dairy productivity through assorted phases of management. Mike?
As we see the milk price increasing on farm, we want to make sure that we're in a position to take advantage of it. It looks like better milk prices will extend at least through much of 2022, but we need to make sure we have the animals and the flow of milk off our farm so that we can take advantage of that. So the first thing you need to start paying attention to is what do your cow numbers look like, and particularly as you look forward in your calving information, how many animals will you be milking into the summer and through the summer. Keeping that cow number as high as possible is very important to increasing your milk flow off the farm. Second thing to think about is your forages. Do you have summertime forages that are of high quality, highly digestible, that will encourage higher levels of milk production in spite of heat stress? It's important to consider this carefully. May still be some alfalfa hay out there that's of higher quality that you might want to consider purchasing sooner rather than later. Some other things that we can consider is how we're going to incorporate some of our spring forages. If we harvest those at a little bit earlier stage of maturity, we can increase the quality, which will increase the amount of milk that we can get per ton of forage. May not want to put all of it up in higher quality forages, but you may want to put up some. That way you can increase the amount of milk flow off your milking herd. One of the last things I want you to think about is your cow cooling systems. I know I've spoken about this before, but it's really important that, at least at this time, that you're making sure that those cooling systems, particularly in the holding pens, are up to snuff and ready to go. So if you haven't gotten the summer maintenance scheduled on those systems, I encourage you to do that sooner rather than later. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to consider how they can increase milk flow over the summertime to take advantage of higher milk prices.
Thanks, Mike. And briefly here to a calendar item of relevance, K-State and Lallemand Animal Nutrition are teaming up once again to host a pair of silage management meetings for you beef and dairy producers, one in eastern Kansas on Tuesday, March the 22nd, and the other in the western part of the state on Thursday the 24th. K-State Beef Systems Specialist Justin Wagner is coordinating these.
Our first iteration of that is going to be on March 22nd in Junction City, Kansas at the familiar Rock Springs Ranch. Then we'll repeat that session on March 24th, so kind of a Tuesday, Thursday type session. That afternoon we'll actually be out in Scott City. And one of the issues that I think a number of producers often run into that we're going to address on the session, doing some pre-planning. How much space allotment do you need for X number of silage? What are in a given scenario? That's something we need producers always to be aware of is, well, how do you plan that space? How much space is it going to take to harvest X tons of silage and put that out? Another emphasis, focus on probiotics and gut health. What are some issues to look for there as well in that particular space? And then my component of the program is I'm actually going to be sharing some historical trends from our Focus on Feedlot data set that we've captured over the past 30 years. So we've got that data archived back to 1990 to present-day closeout. And so I'm going to walk through some of those changes that we've seen in fed cattle performance in the industry and kind of share that with that audience as well.
That's Justin Wagner of K-State. These sessions are from noon until 4 o'clock at both locations. They are free, including the lunch. Information on registering for either of these silage management meetings can be found at southwest.ksu.edu. southwest.ksu.edu. They're taking place Tuesday the 22nd at Rock Springs Ranch near Junction City and Thursday the 24th in Scott City. And with that, our time's away once more. Thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.